Good morning. Welcome to First Church Unitarian here in Littleton, Massachusetts. My name is Lara, Hoke, pronouns she, her, and I'm so happy and lucky to be the minister serving this incredible congregation. Yeah, a couple things I wanted to note. I heard from a few people now that there is in fact a traffic jam, something happening on 495. So we waited a couple of extra minutes, and I'm sure some people will come in as we go on, but apologies for those of you who will, in advance, for those of you who will be getting here later. Just to let you know, today's service, as all of our services, is multi-platform, meaning we welcome those of you who are here in person in the sanctuary and those who are with us online on YouTube or Zoom. We're so happy and lucky that you're with us this morning. We treasure and cherish your presence with us, and we hope to get to know you better as time goes on. We are happy to have you just as you are. Don't worry if there are children or anyone making noises a little bit here and there, because we all make noises and it's okay. We're happy you're here. And there's an area up front, as you can see, for kids, if they wish, to hang out. So we're very happy that you're all here. I wanted to say that if you need pastoral care today for any reason, you can always reach out to me, and you can always reach out to one of our lay pastoral ministers. Today's lay pastoral minister is Patty Sardella, who is with us online today. And the other lay pastoral ministers are David Butts, Ann Donald, Jan Dustin, and Linda Kaler. So please do reach out when you need to. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rich.
Good morning. I'm Rich Lombardy. My pronouns are he, him, and I am honored to be what some people say is the newest deacon. I prefer to refer to myself as the youngest deacon. So you all should have gotten, hopefully, a Community Matters. There's a couple of things in here I'd like to point out. You should read the whole thing. It's fascinating. But for those of you who are just coming out from under your summer rock, you may not have heard that we're having a fair. Not only a fair, but the FCU Country Fair on October 5th. And we want you all to be involved and come to that and help out. Another thing is that next Sunday, there'll be a letter writing campaign, Writing for Democracy. I think it's going to be in the vestry here after the service. Downstairs. I'm sorry, it's downstairs. A little birdie just told me that. Immediately after the service, down the stairs, follow the crowd. We've got our fellowship hour where you can come and talk to people, get to know people who you haven't met before. And if you're new, we especially invite you down and find anybody that's got a name tag. Talk to us. We'd love to tell you all about our church. I think that's it. And with that, everyone should silence your electronic devices, but don't silence your singing voices.
We come together to consider the mysteries of the universe's outer and inner. We come together for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We come together to ask the big questions and to question the answers. Always, we come together to seek the truth in love, always in love. And with deep love, let us worship. I'd like to invite up Tucker to light our chalice this morning. And as Tucker lights our chalice, please join me in saying the words of our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. Our first hymn this morning is number 347 in the gray hymnal, Gather the Spirit. And I invite you to rise in body or spirit. The lyrics will also be on the screens. Please be seated.
Hi, can you hear me? Good. Welcome. Today, we're going to hear a little story about Henry Thoreau. It's called Henry Works. It's a misty, mizzly morning. Henry steps out the door and sniffs the air. It is a perfect day to walk to work. You can hear me? A little louder, Henry stops beside the pond to dig comfrey root. Channing walks by. "Henry," he says, "you're not doing anything today. Come fishing with me." "Not today," says Henry. "I'm walking to work." Henry puts the comfrey root in his hat and walks down the path. From the top of the hill, Henry sees clouds far away. It's been a dry summer, but he knows it will rain today. The rain will not come until afternoon, so Henry fills his cup with water and sprinkles it on the milkweed flowers. Hasmer meets him on the path. "Are you being a rain cloud today, Henry?" he asks. "I'm walking to work," Henry says. At the brook, Henry cuts a pole from a pine branch. With it, he pushes 3 crossing stones into place. He puts the pine needles in his hat with the comfrey root. Henry tramps a trail across Hasmer's field and finds a fox's den. Mrs. Hasmer is sitting at her front window. Henry calls her. "Keep your chickens inside tonight. There's a fox around," he says. He leaves a branch of sweet-smelling pine on her window ledge. In town, Henry meets the postmaster. "Henry," he says, "I can't walk on my sore foot. Since you're not working, can you take this letter to Emerson?" "I'm walking to work right now," Henry says, "but I'll take it to him anyway." And Henry takes the comfrey root out of his hat and gives it to the postmaster. It will make his foot feel better. Henry finds Emerson in his garden and gives him the letter. Emerson says, "The woodchucks are eating everything in my garden, Henry." "I can take care of the woodchucks," says Henry. "I'll bring them out to the country on my way to work." Henry plays his flutes, and the woodchuck runs to him. If only. He tucks one in each pocket and walks off through the woods. In Alcott's field, where Henry sets the woodchucks free, he finds a patch of wild strawberries. He digs up some of the plants and puts them in his hat. Mrs. Alcott is hanging shirts to dry in the yard. "You'll have to bring those shirts in soon," Henry tells her. "It's going to rain in an hour." Henry walks along the road to Hawthorne's house. Inside the fence, the garden is growing wild with grapes and raspberries. Henry takes the strawberry plant out of his hat and finds a perfect place for them in Mrs. Hawthorne's garden. It starts to rain. Henry walks to the mill brook, measuring the shallow water as he goes. Soon he meets old Flint sitting on the bank. "Are you taking a bath, Henry?" asks Flint. "No," says Henry. "I'm just walking to work." Henry climbs out of the brook and into the middle of a big huckleberry bush. He crawls under it to cut away the tangles and picks berries until his pockets are full. Henry marks a path from the road to the huckleberry bush. As Henry walks down the path to his cabin, he meets Channing, carrying his fishing pole. He shows Henry the fish he caught. "Did you go to work, Henry?" he asks. "I'm just getting to work now," says Henry. "What is your work?" Channing asks. "It's writing," says Henry. "I'm writing a book." Henry turns toward his cabin. All day he has taken care of things in the woods and in town. Now he's back where he started. Inside he lights a fire, he hangs up his hat and coat, and then Henry sits at his desk to begin his book. "Today," he writes, "I took a walk in the woods." And I hope you all get to take a walk in the woods.
The Unitarian Universalist Association recently redid its bylaws, changing its second article. And with that article, we feature 6 central Unitarian Universalist values with love at the center. And one of those values is generosity. And each week you have an opportunity to build your generosity muscle as we take our offering for the good works of this congregation. If you are here in the sanctuary, you may place any cash or checks in the plates as they come around. And if you are with us online, if you wish, you could send in a check to First Church Unitarian, Attention Assistant Treasurer, 19 Foster Street, Littleton, Massachusetts, 01460. This morning's offering for the ministries of this church will now be given and received in grateful appreciation. Please join me in the words of our community response. We are grateful for the opportunity to give and serve, and grateful for the gifts we have received. May this affirm the ministries of our church community, both within and beyond these walls. Most weeks, this congregation has a time that we call the Candles of Caring. This is a chance for anyone who wishes to share an important joy or sorrow that is with you this morning. If you wish to share, we ask that you say your name and use the microphone, and let us know briefly how we might direct our thoughts, prayers, and healing wishes. We would ask those of you who are in the sanctuary to come up to the microphone, and if you wish, you can save time by being ready on the side aisles. Or if there's anyone in the pews who would like the microphone brought to you, we will ask after the people have come up and bring the microphone to you where you sit. For those of you who are with us on Zoom, if you wish to share, please raise the hand in the reactions area and we will call on you in turn. Are there any joys or sorrows to share this morning? Any candles of caring? Candle, and let this represent all the joys and sorrows that are with us this morning, but that remain unspoken. Please join with me in the spirit of meditation or prayer. Once again, we have come together, sharing those cares dearest to us with this gathered beloved community. Let us hold in our thoughts, perhaps our prayers, all those joys and sorrows which were spoken aloud this morning, as well as those that remain unspoken, as we share together in a time of sacred silence. Amen, and blessed be. Almost exactly 2 years ago to the day, I preached a sermon here on 21st century Transcendentalism. For those of you less familiar with Transcendentalism, or for those of you who need a refresher, Transcendentalism was a movement in mid-19th century New England, especially in and around Concord, Massachusetts, not far from us here in Littleton at all. Most Transcendentalists were Unitarians. Many of them were ministers. And some of the most famous Transcendentalists you heard alluded to in our story, The Time for All Ages, including Henry David Thoreau, featured in the form of a bear in our story, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, and we had Bronson Alcott, his daughter Louisa May Alcott, and more. They were a very literary crowd. In fact, I'm guessing that many of you learned about Transcendentalism largely as a literary movement, either in high school or perhaps for some in college. I actually first learned about Transcendentalism in high school in an English class, even though I grew up Unitarian Universalist. It's strange to grow up Unitarian Universalist and yet learn about this big part of your tradition in a class in public school. Perhaps we Unitarian Universalists really are burying the lead. Even in my high school English class, it was clear that it was a theological and religious movement, more than just a literary movement. We read Thoreau's Walden, and we read some of Emerson's essays like The Oversoul and like the Divinity School Address, and you couldn't miss all the religious references. It often appears to outsiders, and sometimes even to us insiders in Unitarian Universalism, that Transcendentalism disappeared after the US Civil War. It appears at first glance that it was a short-lived movement. But the point of my sermon 2 years ago was that we don't notice Transcendentalism in our 21st century Unitarian Universalist churches, in part because we're so fully immersed in it. In most ways, Unitarian Universalism in the 21st century is a kind of updated Transcendentalism combined with humanism. We are 21st century Transcendentalists and humanists. We're just too close to it to see it, I think. To a large extent, I think we don't notice the Transcendentalism because they so thoroughly won the battle for Unitarianism and eventually Unitarian Universalism. It's just that it happened in slow motion and over time, making it a little less dramatic, perhaps. The peak of Transcendentalism in name was from about 1835 until about 1855. And at the time, they were really trying to set themselves apart from the congregational churches from which most of them came, even those congregational churches that were starting to identify as Unitarian, starting to reject the doctrine of the Trinity, starting to reject the idea that Jesus was literally and uniquely God incarnate. The Transcendentalists were even more radical in their thinking because they wanted a broad search for truth and spiritual growth that went beyond a focus on Jesus and the Bible. The Transcendentalists wanted to be able to include scriptures from Hinduism, particularly the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, the wisdom tradition within Hinduism. And they wanted to be able to include writings and ideas from Buddhism and other Eastern religions as well. The Transcendentalists, very importantly, wanted to include primary religious experience, one's own spiritual and mystical experiences in nature, with a capital N, to be part of their religious language and traditions. In short, the Transcendentalists were the even farther fringe of the Protestant Reformation than the 19th century liberal Christian Unitarians. The 19th century mainstream Unitarians continued really to focus on the Bible, even if their interpretations were, for the time, very progressive. Mainstream Unitarians of that day often taught that the miracles of Jesus offered crucial proof of the validity of his religious teachings and his value as a prophet. But by contrast, the Transcendentalists weren't interested in the miracles of Jesus really much at all. They were much more interested in the miracles of the natural world that happen all around. Even though liberal Christianity, with its focus on a human but miracle-working primary prophet Jesus, even though that version of liberal Christianity won the battle of the Unitarian churches in the 19th century, by the mid-20th century, 100 years later, it was the Transcendentalist sentiments that really became the heart of Unitarianism. We just weren't using the term so much, or naming it so much in name. Instead, Transcendentalism was and is hiding in plain sight all over the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and even right here at First Church Unitarian. Truly, if we were called the First Transcendentalist Society of Littleton, in many ways that would be more descriptive than First Church Unitarian Littleton. We have been modern-day Transcendentalists all along and just didn't know it. Today, I'd like to spend a little time thinking about, in particular, Ralph Waldo Emerson's concept of the Oversoul, and think about how that fits in with 21st century Unitarian Universalism. The Oversoul, of course, is one of his best known and most important essays, dating back to 1841. And as it sounds, the essay was focused on the idea of the soul. What is the nature of a soul? How is a soul connected to God? And so on. Most of his ideas and conclusions are very heavily influenced by the Vedas, the ancient Hindu scriptures and theology, sometimes called Vedanta. In fact, with the Oversoul, Emerson's theology really sounds more like Vedanta than Christian theology, which is quite extraordinary. Emerson's Oversoul is his term for the great oneness of all things. To give a sense of his ideal of the Oversoul, he wrote, "We live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. Meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And this deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is all accessible to us is not only self-sufficing and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the thing seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are one. We see the world piece by piece," he writes, "as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree. But the whole, of which these are shining parts, is the soul." With this, Emerson is specifically borrowing from concepts in Vedanta known as the Brahman, the Atman, and something called Drig Drisha Vivek. Brahman is the term in the Vedas for the great oneness of all, the ultimate divinity and divine essence of the universe. Atman is the term in the Vedas. It's usually translated as soul, as in the individual soul within humans. It's the true essence of a human, of a person. And finally, in Sanskrit, the term Drig Drisha Vivek. Drig means seer, Drisha means the seen, and Vivek means discernment. So in the Vedanta, again and again, you have this Drig Drisha Vivek, where you're trying to discern what is the seer and what is the seen, and is there a difference? Vedanta says that the mind is a flow of thoughts. The mind is like a river. But the Vedanta points out that you can know your thoughts. You can observe your thoughts as they come. You can observe or see your thoughts and your mind at work. Therefore, with Drig Drisha Vivek, you are not your mind. But who is the true seer? When you close your eyes, maybe in deep thought, maybe in meditation, maybe in prayer, there's some other seer there. There's something inside you beyond your thoughts. There's something in you that knows. There's a watcher within. It's that seer that sees you thinking. What is that? That, according to Vedanta, is Atman. And ultimately, Atman, this seer or watcher or soul within you, is one and the same with Brahman, the great oneness of all things. Atman is simply evidence that really you are Brahman. They are one and the same. You are the great divine oneness, even though you have the illusion of being something separate. And echoes of these concepts are found throughout Emerson's Oversoul essay in his own wording. Of the distinction between our monkey mind of busy thoughts, of our daily lives and our mind's meanderings, versus the kind of peace that one can have when our consciousness connects to the oneness or the Oversoul. Emerson wrote, "The worst feature of this double consciousness is that the two lives of the understanding and of the soul, which we lead, really show very little relation to each other, never meet and measure each other. One prevails now, all buzz and din, and the other prevails then, all infinitude and paradise. And with the progress of life, the two discover no greater disposition to reconcile themselves." Along the same lines, Emerson wrote, "The consciousness in each man is a sliding scale, which identifies him now with the first cause, and now with the flesh of his body, life above life in infinite degrees." In this, you hear Emerson's thoughts about something like a universal consciousness, something like a cosmic mind. In this, he was perhaps ahead of his time, thinking in ways not so different from Carl Jung later on with his ideas of the collective unconscious. Another echo of Vedanta that I hear in Emerson's Oversoul is the idea that one experiences the feeling of being part of the oneness, and when you experience the feeling of being a part of that great unity, you experience bliss, even if it's very fleeting. Emerson noted the convulsions of the Quakers as an example of what he called, quote, "that shudder of awe and delight with which the individual soul mingles with the universal soul." Emerson doesn't necessarily reject the idea of an afterlife, but he certainly wasn't particularly focused on it. Some of his writings suggest something actually closer to reincarnation than to heaven and hell. For instance, he wrote, "The soul comes from without into the human body as into a temporary abode, and it goes out of it anew and passes into other habitations." He writes, "It is the secret of the world that all things subsist and do not die, but only retire a little from sight and afterwards return again. Nothing is dead," he writes. "Men feign themselves dead and endure mock funerals. And there they stand looking out of the window, sound and well, in some strange new disguise." I find it fascinating that Emerson, an ordained Unitarian minister who had had an entirely Christian upbringing, an entirely Christian theological education, ended up adopting such an Eastern theology. In the end, his worldview ends up being one of Eastern religious concepts melded thoroughly with his own very Western life. And in that, Emerson's Oversoul, I see many similarities with 21st century Unitarian Universalism. It's true that not all present-day Unitarian Universalists are followers or believers in Eastern religions. But Eastern religion's influence is a large part of many Unitarian Universalist congregations, many ministers, and many lay people's ways of thinking. And I see much of that right here at FCU. I know that many modern Unitarian Universalists here at FCU are primarily humanists and maybe don't necessarily believe in anything that they would call a soul, maybe don't necessarily believe in anything that they think of as God or an ultimate being or even an ultimate divine force or any kind of afterlife. But for those of us who do believe in some version of those things, and I would include myself in this, For those of us who do have some version of theism, as opposed to a pure humanism that's more atheistic. For those of us that have a kind of theism, it often crosses over enormously with Emerson's Oversoul. I know my theism does. And so if you're a modern Unitarian Universalist, whether you are a theist, an agnostic, or an atheist, it's worth understanding Emerson's Oversoul. It will help you understand some of your crazy theistic friends here at FCU, as well as your crazy theistic minister. It's a variety of theism that doesn't need and often doesn't include a God or a divine being at all. It's merely an acknowledgement that if there is something like a divine essence, it's found in everything, including within. It's a kind of religious belief that doesn't need God at all, something like many versions of Buddhism or Taoism. Again, there's a great crossover with Eastern religious thinking. In fact, the type of theology or theism that I'm describing today, a sort of modern version of something similar to Vedanta and Emerson's Oversoul, it's panentheism. Panentheism as opposed to pantheism. And the difference is, panentheism is a vision that God or the divine is essentially synonymous with the material universe, which would be pantheism, but it also includes something that transcends the material universe and natural world and leaves room for mystery and leaves room for the idea that there are things we will never see nor understand. When asked for my theology, I often will call myself a panentheist. When I look up at the night stars, I see the divine. And when a baby is born, I see the divine. When I see you providing care to each other, I see the divine. When I see something wonderful and mysterious, or when something synchronistic happens, I see the divine. When someone dies, I see the divine. And when something terrifying happens, that's the divine too. Which all fits pretty nicely with our Transcendentalist forebears. The very name Transcendentalist hints at it. In essence, theirs was a philosophy and a religion that transcended cognitive understanding. It transcended the need for scholarly learning or even scriptures. They still valued cognitive understanding and scholarly learning and scriptures. They still thought those things had great value, but what was more central for them transcended anything that you could learn from outside yourself. Central to their belief was what Emerson called in a different essay, self-reliance. And what he meant by that was, rely on your own experience, rely on your own intuition. Emerson and other Transcendentalists thought that each person has the ability to intuit spiritual and religious truths all on their own. And that was, in the mid-19th century, a radical idea. And in fact, in the 21st century, it still is, for many people, a radical idea. To me, this transcendentalist spirit is very much alive in modern Unitarian Universalism. The first of our 6 sources is direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of spirit and a oneness, an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. So today, we're at the beginning of a new church year, and I ask you to remember the astounding influence of Transcendentalism in our living Unitarian Universalist tradition. Perhaps some of you, like me, will come to understand yourselves as 21st century Transcendentalists, or perhaps some version of a modern transcendental humanist. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into your own theology, this year we will be offering an adult religious education curriculum from our Meadville Lombard Theological School called Creating Theology Together. And more information about that will be out soon. But one of the things I like about the curriculum is that it builds on our own theological tradition, which is far richer than most people, even most Unitarian Universalists, appreciate. In closing, don't sell Unitarian Universalism short. There is some there. There's lots of there. Have pride, have faith. And I hope that we will continue to learn together and learn from each other, sharing our own deepest experiences and intuitions and truths. May ours be a religion worth tending to and worth sharing. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. Our closing hymn is in the Teal hymnal at 1058, called Be Ours a Religion. The words are those of Theodore Parker, who was a Unitarian minister and a Transcendentalist, and I'll be talking about him at the Women's Alliance in January, so look for that too. It's our closest, Theodore Parker is our closest connection for this congregation historically and the Transcendental movement, so it's pretty interesting. But with that, I invite you to rise in body or spirit to sing Be Ours a Religion, and we'll sing it through twice. If you're comfortable with it, the tradition of this congregation is to hold hands during our closing words, but you could also touch elbows or feet or anything that works for you, or simply put your hands up and feel the energy between us and those who are with us online as well. May ours be indeed a religion that goes everywhere through us, through our deeply held convictions, through our openness to learning and spiritual truths, our openness to questioning, ourselves too. And indeed, may our ritual be works of service. May this beautiful tradition and religion shine through us all. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen. Please be seated.